Welcome to Sightseeing Japan, the podcast where we explore the land of trust and safety. I'm Paul Bresson.
And I'm Jason Nealing. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Jason.
Question for you.
Yeah.
Have you ever been the victim of a crime?
Of course.
Elaborate.
I've had numerous bikes stolen from me. Those are the ones that stand out the most in my mind.
Of course. That didn't even occur to me. I wasn't sure if you were going to say yes. Okay, Paul, another question. Have you ever been the perpetrator of a crime?
Yeah, I mean, I've broken the speed limit. You know, I've probably trespassed through an area I wasn't supposed to be in.
It's okay, Paul. You don't need to. You can stop.
Murdered that one guy.
Said you could stop.
I'll stop there. What about you, Jason?
Well, I had my license plate stolen off my car a few years ago. That was
sucks.
Interesting. Didn't even know about it until the police showed up in the middle of the night and woke me up. I don't know if I was asleep yet, but I was definitely in bed. Pretty sure I was naked. That's how I'm normally in bed. Anyway, that's not important. But what I'm getting at is I have never been a victim of a crime in Japan, which is not surprising because Japan has a very low crime rate, which you might have heard something about. Although, Paul, did you hear about a couple news stories in Tokyo lately? There was a murder-suicide at the Pokemon Center in Sunshine City, the one we were at.
I did
a couple years ago.
Not hear about that.
Oh, yeah.
That's horrifying.
You remember that Pokemon Center, right?
I do.
One of the female employees was murdered by her ex-boyfriend who was stalking her, I believe.
That's crazy.
I might be misremembering the details, but
wow,
he definitely managed to kill her and then killed himself. Maybe I should have given a warning before I started talking about really dark stuff.
Explicit episode. All right.
I also saw a video of somebody who lit a fire in Shibuya Crossing really recently. Did you hear about that?
No, that's kind of crazy.
Well, those happened. But incidents like those get a lot of attention in part because they are so uncommon in Japan, and especially in a city like Tokyo with 37 million people or so. You're never going to entirely eliminate crime, but Tokyo is still the safest megacity in the world. Japan as a whole is a very safe place. I got a statistic to start us off, Paul.
Okay.
Do you know how many intentional homicides there are per 100,000 people in Japan annually?
Yes. Seems to be somewhere between 0.2 and 0.3.
Depending on the year, yep.
That's per 100,000 people, so that's very few.
So I don't know why they say stats that way. Like, let's just convert that to whole people, you know? That's 2 to 3 homicides per million people. That's pretty low.
Yes.
It's about 25 to 30 times less than the United States, actually, depending on the specific year.
Ooh, when you put it like that.
Yeah.
But also still less than many Western European countries that have different laws as well.
Yeah. I mean, the United States is a bit of an outlier when it comes to developed nations.
I found another stat that I think was even more surprising to me because of the huge difference. And it's the robbery rate. And again, per 100,000 people, because that's just how they do this. In Japan, it's only 1.8 robberies per 100,000 people. And for the United States, it was 99.
Dang.
And for France, it was 150.
Interesting.
So that's, we're talking like 2% or less compared to these other countries. That's so far that it's hard to even mathematically understand for me.
Definitely makes you wonder why. I really wonder now, what's up with France? Like, why is it so much higher than the U.S.? I was about to say, well, it makes sense that the U.S. has more because I would link that kind of thing to like financial desperation. I mean, a lot of crimes are linked to, poverty and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I think in France, people seem, I don't have stats on it, but they seem slightly better off than the U.S. But maybe I'm just really dogging the U.S.
I haven't been to France, but I do feel like there's this stereotype that I've heard repeated that like, oh, watch your wallet in France, you're going to get pickpocketed or
I guess, but
whatever.
I always assumed that was just like for tourists, you know?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, that why question is what we're focusing on today. Not about France, of course, but about why Japan is such a safe place. What are all the factors that might go into explaining this? Because, of course, it can't just be a single thing.
No, it's not. Was this topic your idea? Or was this a suggestion?
I don't know. I don't remember. It was on the list somehow.
Okay.
That's all I know.
I definitely learned some things. My arrogance got taken down a peg here. I was like, yeah, I think I could spit out a bunch of reasons why, but it was interesting looking into this, and there were a few things that I never would have considered that came up in my research.
I agree. So let's start this conversation with a collection of factors that fall under the umbrella of what I'm going to call social cohesion. So this is a dense category, right? There are a lot of cultural factors that work into this, things that tie people together, that tie society together. We've talked a lot about how Japan is a more collectivist society, where the good of society is prioritized over the good of the individual, right? And you could argue that growing up in that kind of society discourages crime to some extent.
I definitely think so. And I think about even if you look at it at the smaller levels of collectivism, like prioritizing the family or the workplace or the neighborhood, not even just society as a whole, but even smaller than that, kind of holds people in line a little bit.
Totally. People are just working in a different kind of psychological framework where they have a greater responsibility to the people around them, right? It doesn't need to be all of society that you have in mind, but even just having a smaller group within that society helps, especially compared to a hyper-individualistic society like perhaps the one that we live in.
Yeah. There's also a really big focus on harmony in Japan, or wa. When you're harmony focused, you're much more avoiding conflict and maintaining smooth relationships. This actually got me rethinking something about Japan. The way that people sometimes apologize, even maybe if they're not in the wrong, even if they're getting picked on or something, they apologize in a sincere way just to not start a fight. That's always kind of like, I come from such an individualistic place that for me, I can't understand that. Why would you ever apologize for something that was never your mess at all and you just have to eat the blame because you're the lowest on the totem pole or whatever? That's always like driven me a little bit crazy. Like I can't understand that. And it's still hard for me, but when you put it in context of, well, maybe that's a piece of what creates this harmonious low crime society, I guess, there are some benefits to that I haven't been able to see from my perspective before.
Totally. I'm thinking back to when I was a kid, and this might be more of a personal thing than an American thing, but I remember always thinking like, I need to be right. That's what was important to me, not smoothing things over or like maintaining a good relationship with people. I just wanted to be right all the time.
I will die on any hill as long as I'm right.
It doesn't matter how small that hill is. I'll die for an anthill.
Yeah.
So since we're really focusing on the why in this episode, I always wondered why Japan had that kind of society in the first place, right? And I think we did an episode that did address that in part, at least. We talked in the rice episode about how rice cultivation may have been a really major factor in creating this type of society, because for rice cultivation to work, you need a lot of people working together. That fostered a wider sense of interdependence, increased that need for social harmony. So maybe that explains why that kind of culture has continued all the way through today, which is kind of amazing that something like that would have such an effect centuries later. But when you look at culture and how slow that can be to change, I mean, we see evidence of that all over the place, how slowly culture changes, right?
Yeah. And they were farming rice for 2,000 years or whatever, and now it's been a couple hundred maybe that hasn't been the main occupation.
Paul, tell me if I'm going too far, but I think you could also argue that maybe these days capitalism's effect on Japan is starting to chip away at that cultural foundation. because I don't know, maybe I'm getting too on a soapbox here, but capitalism doesn't tend to make community ties stronger, right? It kind of does the opposite. Capitalistic societies tend to have less tight-knit communities, and the things that used to be supplied by communities are supplied instead by companies. Is that going too far?
No, I mean, obviously we can't predict the future, but after 2,000 years of capitalism, if that maintains course, I doubt Japanese society looks a ton like it does today.
Yeah. Another way that this collectivism manifests in Japanese culture is the culture surrounding lost and found. Did you get into that at all, Paul, in your research?
I did. So this is another thing where I got surprised. I've long known that Japan's known for the lengths people will go to return lost items, and if you lose your wallet, you're fairly likely to get it back fully intact with no cash gone or anything. But I started reading some articles about this, and the numbers are staggering. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department receives about 4 million lost items a year.
Just in Tokyo, you said?
Yeah, just the police in Tokyo, which is mind-blowing to me. And the amount of staff and storage space that you need just to deal with that, everything gets documented. There's an attempt to try to find the owner. Like, the amount of resources they put into that surprises me.
Yeah, yeah. It is crazy, the kinds of stories you hear about people losing things in Japan, and like in situations where you imagine they could there's zero chance that they're going to get that thing back. It just shows up at their doorstep one day or something.
Yeah. You can like go in a store around here and be like, oh, did I leave something behind? And they'll just be like, we don't have it. But I've heard stories about people in Japan, like, I think I left this thing on a train, and like they're calling every single 150 stations in their network, seeing if anyone found the thing. Then they're like trucking it back over to be picked up by this person. It's a wonderful system.
It is. Another element of this collectivist society is the idea of shame and honor. You've probably heard about that, right? How it's people in Japan like to save face. You got to protect your family's honor and avoid shame.
Yeah.
So some criminologists say that Japan's use of shame-based social control has an impact on crime. Paul, I've long heard this saying in Japan that the nail that sticks out gets hammered down, right?
Yep.
I think that's used to convey how Japan is a conformist society. And if you're not acting right, other people are going to hear about it. People might look down on your family. You shame your family. And the idea is that this social pressure helps prevent crime. You don't want to make your family look bad. Paul, what came to mind for me reading about this is that monk that burned down the Golden Pavilion. You remember that story?
Oh, yeah. Didn't his mother kill herself because of her no good son or whatever?
The shame. I mean, she had a quote specifically about how, like,
I can't live
family,
like this.
Yeah, our family can't recover from this shame, something like that.
Yeah. I think the family's the big one, but I think this also resonates to once you get to your workplace, you can't bring shame to your workplace or to your school or any sort of group that you're in. There's this pressure to not cause problems. I think this is a big part of it. Yeah. I think the shame is a big driving factor in people deciding not to do criminal activities.
I have heard that like ostracizing a person from a society, shunning them, is like one of the worst things you can do for a person's mental state.
Yeah.
And if your entire social circle sees you as a pariah and like doesn't want to be associated with you, I could see that being a pretty powerful thing. I feel like in the US, people don't have as close of social ties maybe as, at least historically in Japan, people have. You know?
I think one of our big issues here is that a lot of people have zero shame.
Yeah, right.
Like absolutely shameless.
Is it because we don't judge each other as harshly? We don't shame each other?
You know, I think that, yeah, we are too forgiving in some instances, yeah.
Interesting idea.
I think it's for the people that repeatedly do the wrong thing again and again and again and again and like don't get ostracized. Like how many chances can we give this person?
Yeah. Another element in this collectivist system is the education system in Japan. That definitely helps instill pro-social values. Biggest thing that came to mind here for me, Paul, was how students clean the classrooms together. It's like the students are responsible for keeping the school clean rather than having janitors that clean up all the puke and stuff.
Yeah. Shared responsibility for public spaces being taught to kids at a young age. I could see some positive effects of that happening.
Mm-hmm. So that's early on in life, of course, but I feel like those values are also reinforced in a lot of different ways all the way up to and through adulthood. This made me also think of the recycling sorting. Like everybody is so on top of how do you sort your recycling perfectly. And I feel like that's a common complaint for foreigners too. Like foreigners living in Japan, if they mess up with their recycling sorting, the neighbors are going to call it out and be like, this gaijin, this is the problem with foreigners. They can't sort the recycling properly.
Dude, I screw it up all the time too. I remember last time we were there, I think I was eating a bento in the airport and like, I went to go throw it away and I was like, I'm pretty sure this isn't recycling, but I don't know if this is all burnable. And those were the only two ones I saw. And I think I just ended up throwing in the burnable. And then I walked like 20 feet the other direction. There were like 3 more choices. And I was like, I already made the wrong choice.
I thought you were going to say you looked back and you saw somebody picking it out of there and putting it in the proper receptacle.
No, but that might happen at some point.
I've heard of that happening. I've heard of like tourists or whatever getting called out. Like, no, you put that in the wrong place. And this is not something I can just let go.
Yeah. I think that another component to the education is that high levels of education tend to be linked to lower crime rates. And Japan has a very high rate of high school completion and a fairly robust university system. So highly educated people tends to be less crime rate. There's also the economic factor, where economically desperate people do more crimes. But if you have a good education, you're less likely to have those sorts of economic problems.
Those tie together too, because it's also cheaper to get an education in Japan than it is in, for example, America.
Yes.
Now, Paul, I got something maybe controversial to discuss.
Controversy already. I know there's going to be some controversy coming up in this one.
Yeah, I mean, all of this, this is a tough topic.
Yeah, none of this, there's so many different factors that it can't be measured. It's only guessed upon how much each thing really affects the total, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, the measuring, we got more to talk about. Even just like the idea of measuring crime is difficult, but especially when you start talking about why. Criminologists are still debating the level of impact of all of these things. Nobody agrees on like, well, this contributes this percentage to the crime rate. I don't know. Getting off the rails. But the controversial thing that I want to get your opinion on, Paul, is some people think that maybe a big factor is that Japan has such a homogenous society. What is it, like 99-point-something% of people in Japan are Japanese. And people think, well, if you had more foreigners, you'd have more crime. Not even necessarily that like the foreigners are the ones committing the crimes, but that there's less social trust in a more diverse society. I saw that idea come up. You can definitely find that idea coming up in conservative news outlets.
Yes, it's been, I think worldwide, that's kind of been a big theme of the last few years of lots of communities blaming immigration for crime and all sorts of other problems that they have. I don't really buy into it. I did look at this, and a couple things that possibly could make some sense are less rapid demographic shifts. Neighborhoods and communities staying more the same because there's not a bunch of new people coming in and people coming out. I think that links a little bit, though, to willingness to move. But the stable communities apparently lead to less crime.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about demographics, another demographic factor I came across is the shrinking birth rate in Japan. That could even impact crime because there are fewer young people than ever before, and crime is disproportionately committed by young men. So based on that alone, you would expect to see crime decreasing over time.
Yes. Japan has also historically had a high rate of two-parent households, which could lead to more discipline or supervision of youth that could help people keep in line.
Sounds like a conservative talking point to me, Paul.
It was a theory I saw in my research. I don't think it matters how many parents you have. I think it matters how good the parents you have are at raising you.
But I also got to admit that like one person raising a child is probably going to have less time to dedicate to raising that child.
Yeah, probably. Two people would be more. But it gets into other factors too. Are the grandparents around? Is the extended family there to help? Is the neighborhood a tighter knit community or not? All those factors can change wildly depending on where you are in the world.
That's the thesis of this episode. Lots of factors.
Yeah. There's also the broken windows theory.
Another somewhat controversial one, huh?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I fully made up my mind on this, but the gist of it is if there is a broken window that doesn't get fixed, it sends the message that nobody cares or no one's in control here, and you're more likely for somebody to go and break a second window because they feel like there's not the same negative consequences that are going to happen.
Yeah. So to put it in slightly more general terms, minor signs of disorder degrade respect for the law and encourage more serious crime. That's kind of the way that I saw it.
Yeah, I did see it speculated that this could eventually escalate to more serious crime happening.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not specifically about just broken windows, obviously. If you're seeing graffiti or trash lying all around or just general signs of disorder, it makes people think, well, this isn't a place where laws are really strict or are enforced that well or whatever.
Yeah. Like if you got a brand new, beautiful car, you're more likely to pay attention to keeping it nice than if you inherited some old beater that's already dented and rusty, right?
And when you put it that way, it sounds kind of convincing.
But I mean, I believe that if one window's broken, you're more likely to get a second window broken. I'm a little bit more skeptical of that, if that will like lead down the road to like violent assault and murder or not. That seems like more of a leap to me.
Sure. And even setting aside the question of how true it is, the other problem with it is that this has been misapplied to justify discrimination against minorities, things like that. Minority communities might not look as nice because people don't have as much money. Maybe the city isn't investing as much money in keeping those parts of the city nice. You know, there are lots of factors, right? And so the cops might just spend more time in that part of town because they think that there's more going on there.
This is why I'm not a social sciences guy. It's too soft. I need hard numbers. I need reality, not speculation.
It is so hard to get to the bottom of what's actually going on. But getting back to Japan, the idea is, since we know that Japan's cities are very clean and orderly, supposedly that creates a subconscious pressure to maintain that orderliness. It should have a downward pressure on crime. And I don't know, Paul, I guess what this brought to mind for me is like, yes, Japanese cities are generally very clean and orderly, but also you don't really have to go that far out into suburban or rural areas before you start seeing rundown houses, like buildings that look like they're about to collapse, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
You know?
I was thinking that too. You do see that all over rural Japan, just because the depopulation there and things are getting abandoned. But maybe along that same route is, well, a lot of the younger people have already left those areas. So the people that would have been the hooligans causing problems, they're already just in the city anyways.
Yeah. Another thing that came to mind here is the lack of trash cans and how everyone carries their trash around with them. So I feel like that goes back to that idea of like, we're all working together to keep our society and our city nice.
I do see this where that could be effective, where if we do keep everything really clean, you don't want to be the first one to throw trash on the ground.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, now, I don't know, in my opinion, this is the big one, this next thing.
Okay.
This is what I feel like has the most evidence backing it up. We're talking about collection of factors that we'll call economic factors.
Sure.
Just based on what I was reading, it seems like criminologists seem confident that economic factors are major factors when it comes to the question of crime, right? So let's start with low income inequality. Income inequality is a central driver of crime. The more unequal a society is, the more crime and lower social trust you can expect to see. That's another thing I kept seeing coming up is social trust.
Yeah. I also saw social alienation. When you see everyone else prospering and you don't feel like you're sharing into that, you'd be more likely to go burn something down, figuratively or literally, I guess.
Yeah. I feel like this makes a lot of sense intuitively, too. Like human beings, on the whole, respond in predictable ways to incentives. I'm always talking about incentives, man. People respond to incentives. Like that's just such a reliable thing that so many governments, companies, a lot of people just like don't consider that. What incentives are you giving people, right?
Yes. I think that's a huge thing that we don't think about nearly enough in our policy decisions.
Yeah. So like there is a level of poverty, a level of desperation where it makes sense for you to steal things. You're incentivized to steal things. For example, I mean, there are other crimes that you could be motivated to commit, but like I think about like, well, stealing food, the potential benefit of stealing food to keep yourself alive, or even just to steal something that you can sell to get money to buy food, that outweighs the negative consequences of getting caught.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that also plays with inequality too. If it's like back in the day and you're having a famine and everybody's starving and you steal your neighbor's food, that feels like understandable, but a bad thing to do. But if you're starving and you're stealing a loaf of bread from $1 billion mega corporation, it's hard to feel really bad about that when you're that desperate, right?
Totally. Also, if you're already starving and you get caught committing a crime and you go to jail, well, at least in jail, they're feeding you.
Yeah,
right?
that happens.
I think I actually read that in Japan, there's been a rise in senior citizens committing minor crimes just so that they can go to jail and get food, which is really sad.
Yeah, like go to a bank and hand them a note saying I'm robbing you and then just sit down and wait for the police to come.
Yeah,
that is sad. Another unique thing about the economy in Japan is long-term employment. It's still kind of the norm to work for one company for decades, and that provides economic stability. But also, if you screw it up with that company, it seems like it's so much harder to get hired later on. Like, oh, you've already worked at another company? Why couldn't you stay there? Mm-hmm. It kind of tarnishes your reputation in the workplace. So you're a little more incentivized. I have this job. I can't do anything that'll lose it, or I'll be in trouble for the rest of my life.
I think I've heard that culture of staying with a whole company for your whole career is less prevalent than it used to be.
It is trending in that way, but it's still way more prevalent than definitely around here. Another big aspect would be the social safety net. When you hit hard times, is there something there to help you get by so you don't have to resort to crime? And
absolutely.
Japan has low unemployment already, but they also do have unemployment insurance and things that'll cover you if you get injured at work.
They have public assistance. They have pensions. Maybe the biggest part of their social safety net.
Universal health care.
Yes, universal health care.
Yeah.
And that helps keep wealth disparity lower, of course. It's easy to imagine that there would be more crime if more people were bankrupt and desperate because of medical bills, which happens in certain other places.
Walter White? Anybody?
All right, Paul. So we talked about some social factors. We talked about some economic factors. What about the government?
Wait, is the government doing things that help?
It does things that have an impact. That's all.
Can governments do that? Are they allowed to help people?
That's what they say. I'm skeptical, but...
Well, I think one very obvious place to start is gun control.
Seems like a big example of prioritizing social stability over personal freedom.
Yes. They have very limited access to shotguns and air rifles, but you have to go through this huge process. You have to keep getting recertified and retested. There are very few guns out in the public in Japan.
I'm looking at my notes and realizing how many references I have to the United States in here. That's just what I have to compare Japan to, you know?
Yeah, and there do seem to be numbers that suggest the less guns out in a society, the less homicides you will have.
Oh, I got some great numbers, Paul. You want some numbers?
Sure.
I'll give you numbers.
Okay. But what about Switzerland, bro? They have guns. I feel like that's the point I always hear for the anti-gun control crowd.
I don't have any stats about Switzerland, but I can compare Japan and the United States. Here's a stat from 2023. That year in Japan, 10 people were killed by handguns. How many people do you think were killed by handguns in the United States in that same year?
2,000.
Oh, Paul.
Wait, there's more people, the higher population in America.
But not by a ridiculous
by
amount.
3-ish, a little over 3 maybe.
Yeah, so 10 people in Japan compared to
3,000.
38,658.
38,000? Just by handguns, not by all guns.
Right. And I do have a note here, actually. The U.S. has less than 3 times more people, so can't really say, oh, well, the U.S. has way more people.
Wow.
That's a staggering difference.
Yeah, it is. That's crazy.
But having less guns around doesn't just mean fewer gun deaths. It also means fewer impulsive killings, right? If you want to kill someone in the U.S. and you have a gun, it just takes a fraction of a second to end that person's life. In Japan, you want to kill someone, you really got to commit, you know? You got to put in some effort.
Yeah.
It also means conflicts don't escalate as quickly, and crime in general, any kinds of crime, result in dead people less of the time. Seems like a good thing. Seems like a good thing.
Yeah.
Me. Another way that laws in Japan may impact the crime rate is there are zero-tolerance drug laws. Yet again, another example of how personal freedoms are restricted for the sake of social harmony. Drug laws in Japan are very strict. As a visitor, I think we've said this before, don't bring drugs into Japan. You could get in a lot of trouble. You could get arrested, deported, banned from returning to Japan, even with just a small amount of something.
Even some prescription drugs from other countries.
Yeah.
Do
your research. There's a list on that
They really
stuff.
don't like amphetamines or anything cannabis-based.
Yeah. So the result of these laws is that there are very low rates of hard drug use, which means less violence related to the drug market. You know, we're not saying that all people that do any kind of drug are going to commit crimes or whatever, but overall, generally.
Yeah, you've got this underground cash business. People are robbing each other and, bad things are happening in the unregulated world of the drug market.
This is a whole other discussion, but you could argue that if drugs were legal, you wouldn't have the same issues with violence and crime related to them.
Yeah. This is another one I'm a little skeptical on, but this is where it's hard to compare numbers. You're comparing total arrests. If one country has a bunch of people using drugs and they keep arresting people for having a small amount of personal drugs on them and they get arrested 5 or 10 times throughout their life, it's going to inflate numbers, but is that really a less safe country?
The definition of crime
nuance there
goes into how and
it's whatever the government defines as crime, right?
Right. And again, we'll get to that discussion of how hard it is to get solid numbers on crime. There's so many factors, and that's one of them. Is just what is the definition of a crime?
Also, with less drug users, you'll have less addiction-driven theft.
Sure,
which is definitely a thing.
Yep. Drugs are bad, okay. Paul, you ready to talk about the pigs? The coppers?
Yeah, the police.
Yeah, those guys. The keisatsu.
I wonder what the nickname is in Japan. I doubt they call them pigs. I wonder what they call the
buta
for slang. But there are some unique things to policing in Japan.
For sure.
Right? I think one of the main things that you hear about a lot is the Koban, or the local police box. A lot of neighborhoods will have just a really tiny little hole-in-the-wall police station that's manned.
Yeah, let me compare this to the U.S. because we don't have anything quite like this. Paul, in the U.S., have you ever had someone start following you in your car so you drive to the police station?
No.
Lucky you. I did that.
I've had people follow me, but I never drove to the police station.
For some reason, I feel like that was a thing in high school. Like, everybody knew if somebody starts following you and you're feeling creeped out, go drive by the police station and they'll
Yeah, it's not a bad
leave you
idea.
alone. Yeah.
Not a bad idea at all.
And of course, the reason that that's good advice is because there's probably not a lot of crime that happens right around police stations. But in the U.S., police stations are very spread out.
Yeah, you've got 7 precincts in this huge city. There are not a ton of little spots you can go to.
The population is also very spread out, right? We have a lot of suburban sprawl.
Yeah.
So I feel like Koban couldn't even really quite work in the U.S.
Yeah, I could see it equated to like they used to have more officers walking the beat, so to speak, where they kind of patrol on foot in the neighborhood and they'd get to know the store owners and kind of the things going on.
Well, you're imagining a walkable city.
Yeah, like maybe like New York back in the day or something, or like downtown Minneapolis, you could maybe do that.
Yeah.
But I think there's something to that, having the police there, getting to know the local residents. They can kind of maybe feel when something's off or have an idea of where to investigate when something happens because they're more tied into that local community.
Totally, yeah. So like in Japan, they do have the big police stations like the ones we have here. But these Koban just create a more omnipresent police presence. I repeated myself. Presence. Anyway, it's just like the police are more visible, which just on its own discourages crime, right?
Yeah.
If you can look down the block and be like, oh, there's a cop right there. I can see him. I can see the whites of his eyes. I'm less likely to commit a crime.
Yeah, they can respond very quickly because there's a Koban just around the corner.
Yeah. So there are like 3 to 5 officers per Koban, and they do patrol the local area, whether that's on foot or on bike, maybe by car. And Paul, I'm trying to think back to like walking around Tokyo. I guess I've seen Koban around, but like I don't really take too much notice of them. Like I can't think of a specific place where I know there's a Koban or something. I just like notice them once in a while.
Yeah, I couldn't recall a specific one, but I know I've seen a bunch of them. Every once in a while I'm walking around, little Koban, little police station, and I just move on and I don't think about it again.
Yeah. And I've never walked into one. I've never had a reason to, fortunately. But from what I read, these things are designed to be as approachable and welcoming as possible. So for one thing, they're open 24/7, which is good. Crime can happen at any time of day or night. They have big windows and open layouts to make people feel more comfortable about heading inside.
That's smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul, I remember in the mascots episode, we talked about how some police were using a friendly dog mascot to make people more comfortable approaching police.
Yep.
So in general, people in Japan have high trust in police, and that extends to high trust in the government overall, making them more likely to follow laws, report crimes, cooperate with police. It probably also helps that they're not always hearing news stories about police shooting citizens in the head.
Yeah, I bet that helps. So we talked a lot about the local policing there. There's another possibility here I heard about the way their national police works is that there's a national police agency with standardized procedures nationwide, and it kind of filters down from there. I think around here you have much more independent. Every city just has its own police. So they sometimes like cross-train or work together, but there's no national police organization that filters down. It helps them share information better and have the similar practices and everything. That maybe helps them solve crimes or keep the crime rate low in some way.
That makes sense. If like each Koban is connected to a bigger police station or whatever.
Yeah.
So these Koban are really common in urban areas, but in suburban or rural areas, it doesn't quite make sense because the population density isn't as high, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
So instead they have these things called chuzaisho, which are, I mean, really similar in a lot of ways. They're just smaller police boxes. They usually just have a single police officer rather than 3 to 5. And it might also be where the officer lives with his family.
Okay.
So it's almost just like you have like your local police officer down the street.
It's like back in the day, like the sheriff. Yeah, I'll go to the sheriff's house. See if you can help me out.
Totally. Think of like the Wild West, and it's like there's that one guy that's keeping order in the town.
Yep.
Yeah. Got a stat for you, Paul.
Okay.
To illustrate how effective this community policing system is, there are around 6,300 Koban and 6,200 Chuzaisho in Japan.
Wow. That's a lot.
That's like 12,500 little police boxes scattered around the country that's, remember, about the size of California. That seems like pretty dense.
It does, yeah.
I saw this listed as one of the reasons that in Japan, the police have a very high rate of cases solved because of just their high presence because of the Koban.
I can see that tracking.
So that's kind of the foundation of the community policing system in Japan. But there are other tools that they use to keep the peace. There are also local volunteer organizations, kind of like, I guess, Neighborhood Watch is what I thought of if I'm comparing it to the U.S.
I think their neighborhood association, I think, is a big thing in Japan. Lots of little neighborhood associations.
Okay. They also have CCTV around the cities, security lights.
Yeah,
Crime thrives in the dark, right, Paul?
I think with the city planning, some of this is intentional and some of it is just happens to be because of the density. But when there's more eyeballs around, more witnesses around, there's just less likely to be crime because you're more likely to get caught.
That makes sense.
There's kind of the trope that I guess has roots in reality in that the empty parking lot, you're way more likely to have crime in just because it's this huge empty space where there's nobody around and you can just go do something and get away. There's much less of that in Japan because everybody's taking public transit and it's just so much more dense. You don't have these areas of nobody being around.
Yeah, I guess that is kind of just a result of the way things are rather than intentional planning. But I thought it was also really interesting how they would intentionally plan the cities in a way that would discourage crime. Like use landscaping that isn't high enough to block your view. So there's just more visibility and less hidden places for crime to happen.
Okay. I didn't think about that.
I mean, even though Tokyo has a lot of like small alleyways and stuff, when I just kind of try to visualize Tokyo in my mind, it does feel like really open. You know what I mean? Like it feels more spacious.
Because it's so
open.
walkable.
I guess that's it.
But even with all those alleys, how long is it before the next person's going to walk down?
Right. Well, the
Like
alleys are filled with
seconds.
things too. It's not just like an alley with trash cans and rats.
Yeah, there
It's
might be
like
stores or restaurants there.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Paul, we talked about legislation. We talked about police. What about the judicial system? How does that relate to crime statistics?
I think that has a lot to do with crime statistics.
Did you know that Japan has one of the world's lowest incarceration rates?
Yes.
You know how many people are incarcerated per 100,000 people?
No.
33.
Okay.
Compared to, in the U.S., per 100,000 people,
500.
Oh, so close. 542.
Oh, man. That's a lot.
So, yeah. I mean, comparing those numbers, it makes sense. If Japan has a much lower crime rate, they're going to have lower incarceration rates. But they also have a conviction rate of over 99%. So what is that about? This seems like an area with a lot of controversy from what I saw.
Yeah.
And this also reminded me, Paul, I think when we were young, and you were indoctrinating me into the world of weebdom, I seem to remember you telling me something about this, that like in Japan, like if you're accused of a crime, you're like going to prison.
Yeah. Like once they lock in on you as the suspect, like that's it. You're the guy.
Do you feel like your understanding of why and how that has changed since you did the research here?
I think it's just solidified it a little bit. I think it's a lot of the same things that I was already aware of.
Okay.
Maybe the biggest one that I guess I hadn't thought about a lot before is that part of why this conviction rate is so high is that they really don't like not convicting someone. So they only take cases to court if they have a really solid case or a lot of evidence or a confession.
I saw that Japanese prosecutors drop around half of the cases they're given. So yeah, they're really only pursuing the ones where they're really confident that they're going to win. And you could say, well, maybe that doesn't seem right, because like, are they just dropping all these cases to keep the conviction stats artificially high? Like, is that the motivation? But there are other more reasonable reasons
Yeah.
to do that, right? On the other side of the argument, like, why would you want to waste the time and the resources with a case that you aren't confident you can win? Like, it just doesn't seem like an effective use of government resources, right?
Right. There is a limited amount of resources. I don't know if this factors into thinking much, but like, if you have less solid evidence, you're less sure you actually have the right person. Do you really want to fully pursue that and hope you win the coin flip and get them convicted?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think that falsely accusing someone of a crime is a pretty crappy thing to do. I mean, you could ruin a person's life by accusing them of something they didn't commit. So in that sense, yeah, I would really hope that the government isn't going to go after someone unless they're really sure. Another note is that 99 or over 99% conviction rate includes plea deals. If you take those out, the rate is lower. So they're also kind of encouraging people to make a deal.
Yeah.
And I mean, undoubtedly, some of the people that are taking these deals aren't necessarily doing it because they're guilty. Like, you can imagine a situation where that would be your best option, even if you weren't guilty, if you didn't think you could actually win the case.
Absolutely. I'm pretty confident that that happens.
So conviction rate, I'm going to keep hedging. Conviction rate is a really hard data point to draw conclusions from because different countries measure the conviction rate in different ways. It has so much to do with other parts of the justice system. So many little factors go into affecting that rate that it's hard to really get much from it. But we shouldn't take the high conviction rate to mean that everything's fine in Japan and there are no issues. I guess this is where I have like maybe the biggest controversy section, Paul, if you want to get into that.
Yeah, I do. Let's wade into the controversy.
Okay. So, Paul, did you come across the term hitojichi shiho?
Yes. Hostage justice?
Yeah, exactly. So, in Japan, if you are accused of a crime, but you deny that accusation, they could hold you for a long and arbitrary period of time to try to get a confession out of you.
They put very heavy pressure on people they think are guilty for confessions.
You know, I was going to compare to the U.S. again. I remember hearing so many stories about how, like, you stick somebody in an interrogation room for like 8 hours and you just pound them with questions for 8 hours. It's really surprisingly easy to get a false confession out of somebody.
Yes. Yeah. And there's more protections here, I'd say, against that.
Yeah.
And it still happens. You just play on their psychology. You know, these interrogators are expertly trained to be able to manipulate people and get them to say what they want them to say.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy that apparently in Japan, you can be held for up to 23 days without charges.
Yeah. And it seems to me what I was hearing was even after those 23 days, they can release you and then they can rearrest you and hold you for another 23 days.
It's crazy, the loopholes, man. So, okay, let's walk through this process. Let's say you're arrested. You're accused of something. They don't charge you yet. They can hold you for 23 days. You might think, well, let me just apply for bail. Nope, you can't apply for bail until they indict you, until they press charges.
And even then, they might deny your bail.
I read it's routinely denied. So there's a lot there that's pushing everyone towards false confessions. Like, that happens. There are a lot of false confessions.
Yes.
Which, of course, lead to wrongful convictions. I mean, if they have a confession, that's going to drop that case into the bucket of, these are cases we think we can win. They admitted it, you know?
Yeah, right. I have a confession. I'm probably winning, right? They will interrogate repeatedly, day after day, to try to get you to confess. And a lot of the interrogations happen without lawyers being present. For me, this has long been where I think it's the most shady part of the Japanese legal system.
Yeah.
I wonder how many false confessions they get out of people, because this plays into, I feel like this even plays into the shame and stuff. You would think that you would proclaim your innocence to not shame your family, but it almost seems to me like it feels like you're shaming your family more if you did something wrong, but you won't admit to it. You did something wrong. At least just take blame for it so that your family can move on and save some face. If you never admit it, you did it wrong. That's the worst possible outcome that you could have.
Yeah. This didn't even occur to me until just now, but I feel like that might even kind of tie into the whole samurai ideal of like, if you did something wrong, you own up to that. You slice your belly open, you fall on your sword, like
yeah. And then
you
often
take
those
responsibility.
people are held historically as heroes.
Yeah.
They were rebels or they did something really wrong, but they were noble in their ideals and held to them, and that lifts them up into this high status.
Yeah. Paul, this is just random speculation here, but it occurs to me that perhaps this fear of being falsely accused could also even put downward pressure on crime, because people would be really nervous about that. I mean, honestly, Paul, the idea of being falsely accused and ending up in prison for like decades, I mean, just that's a life-destroying circumstance. That's one of the scariest things I can imagine.
Yeah, and you bring shame to your family. Yeah, I could see.
I'm really passionate about falsely imprisoned people. Like, there's nothing that enrages me more than hearing about somebody that has been in prison for 40 years and there was just new evidence that like exonerated them.
Yeah.
That's insane to me.
And sometimes I hear these crazy stories where like they've had this evidence for years, but the court just refused to hear their case, or it took forever to wind through. And it's like, we know this guy's innocent. Like, and you keep him in prison for 8 more years. It's so infuriating. But yeah, I could see if your buddy's smoking the reefer in a park or something, I would just bolt.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even want to be within a mile of here when they catch you, because they're going to rope us all in, and then they're going to interrogate me for 23 days until I admit that I was doing it too,
Totally. Scary stuff.
Yeah. I think you alluded to earlier what really is the accuracy of crime numbers too.
Sure.
What gets reported, right? I think that there is some speculation that problems can be hidden a bit in Japan, maybe along that harmony thing. If there's domestic violence or harassment, you don't want to make waves, or you don't want to bring shame upon the family, so maybe you just endure it rather than reporting it as a crime.
Sure. And it's true that domestic abuse often goes unreported all over the world. Like, that's that type of crime that people tend to not report as much as other crimes. But yeah, I could imagine it being more true in Japan. So it's hard to say how prevalent that is, how it compares to other countries. I do have one stat on that. National surveys have consistently found that 1 in 3 women experience a violent act committed by their husband at least once in the course of their marriage.
Would you say it was for the world?
Just in Japan.
Okay.
National surveys in Japan.
1 in 3. That's crazy.
Doesn't that seem really high?
That's crazy high.
I don't have a stat to compare it to in the U.S., but that seems
that's concerning.
Sad. Yeah, that's sad.
Yeah. Wow.
I just said to you the other day, isn't it great how much we like each other? We were sitting down and eating dinner, and I was just thinking, like, there's so many couples that just seem to hate each other, and they sit down to dinner and like don't say a word. I don't know.
Right. I lived with you guys for a couple of years. Never heard you screaming at each other. I've had roommates before where just screaming match with the girlfriend in the middle of the night, just disaster. Just, oh my God, what are we doing? Not fun.
I know it.
Glad you get along.
Me too.
So another aspect of this is, what does a government decide to report as a crime stat? I don't really have any numbers on this, right? Because how do you measure if crime's really being reported accurately or not? But I do recall some examples from the U.S. where there's a hotly contested mayoral race or something, and the police are clearly on one side, and all of a sudden there's all this violent crime being reported, and it's a huge problem. And then after the election, it just goes straight back to normal. Well, did we start just reporting everything when before we were not? I think those numbers can definitely be manipulated for agendas sometimes, but I couldn't say if or how much this is happening in Japan.
Let me make a bold statement, Paul.
Okay.
All numbers can be manipulated and often are.
I agree.
Wow, man, there's a term for this where whenever you choose a stat and say, this is the important stat, we want this number to be better, whether that means higher or lower. As soon as you point out that stat becomes a less reliable measure of whatever you want it to measure because now people have a motivation to game the stats.
Yeah, I could see that. I think you see that sometimes, like whatever a politician, if they're talking about the stock market all the time, they're going to purposely make moves that try to inflate the stock market because that's how they're measuring themselves, and that's how they want to be measured, or whatever target they're specifically going at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I had one other point here that's sad, related to underreporting. In Japan, rape is not always treated seriously. Apparently, they have laws that categorize sexual assault of an intoxicated person as quasi-rape. And rapes perpetrated by people who are known to the victim might be treated less seriously than those perpetrated by a stranger. So obviously you can imagine, in rapes in any society, it's hard to report that kind of thing. That's another one of those crimes that's consistently underreported, right?
Yeah.
But if you know that you're not going to be taken seriously, that further discourages people from making an official complaint. So that is probably a factor in Japan.
Yes.
Although I have read, on the hopeful note, I've read that there have been recent legal reforms that have made it easier for victims of sexual offenses to report crimes and get help.
Good. Yeah, I think that's a problem in a lot of places.
For sure.
I'm glad to see countries moving in that direction.
Yeah. And since those reforms, stats have risen for those types of crimes in Japan. So hopefully that's because of better reporting and not because of more crime.
Yeah, in an awful way, that's maybe a good sign.
Yeah.
Because these can actually be investigated and...
Right. Well, if it's not reported, nobody's going to pay attention to it. Nobody can do anything about it.
Yeah.
So I might have already made this point, but just want to say underreporting issues are not uniquely Japanese, of course. Some people might point to that and say that Japan is basically lying about their low crime, but all countries struggle with accurately reporting and recording crime to some extent. So it's really hard to compare countries directly to each other.
Yeah. And some things are harder. Like, it's probably harder to hide a homicide than it is some lesser crime, right? Because you have a dead body that has to do something, has to happen. Also, just so much anecdotal evidence of people living in Japan and people spending a lot of time in Japan and just not experiencing a lot of crime. It does tend to back up the numbers in that way.
Oh, and there can be political motivations that affect all that too. I think we have some of that later on, but there's just so many factors, Paul. So many factors.
Yeah. Well, shall we talk about some recent trends in crime in Japan, Jason? So one thing that I actually learned from this is that when I started getting into Japan years ago, I already thought and had heard that the crime rate was low, but I didn't realize that the crime rate steadily lowered year by year from about 2000 to 2020.
Yeah, the time when you were thinking that was probably actually like a spike in crime in Japan,
yeah,
right?
And it's got much lower since then.
Yeah.
Though over the last 4 or 5 years, it has been ticking back up, but ticking back up from historical lows.
But that doesn't negate the fact that people in Japan also have a perception that crime is worse than it has been in the past. I actually have a stat here. So Paul, as you mentioned, as of 2026, crime in Japan has been increasing for 4 consecutive years. In a survey from October 2025, 79.7% of respondents felt that public safety has gotten worse over the last 10 years.
That may not statistically be true, but when crime has risen 4 years in a row, I can understand how people feel like that, right?
Yeah. So I saw that the recent rise in overall crime is mostly attributable to an increase in theft and fraud, specifically.
I saw that as well.
So that covers things like romance scams, investment fraud, social media scams, phone scams. Honestly, Paul, I imagine that all of this stuff is going to get much worse in the near future because of the AI. Have you heard about like people getting calls from what totally sounds like their relative, that's like, oh, I'm in a bad situation. I need you to send me money.
Yeah.
That stuff is so scary.
That's crazy. Be like, hold on, Dad. I need to call you back to verify that it's really you.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of these fraud schemes are targeting the elderly. And there is a large elderly population in Japan, so it's a large target.
Yeah.
I do think this maybe reflects on Japanese society a little bit because these are like faceless crimes. Like you're stealing from somebody that you never meet face to face. It's bad, but it's not violent. You're scamming somebody. It's like a more non-confrontational crime, if that makes sense.
Doesn't make you any less of a crappy person, in my opinion.
I 100% agree.
That stuff is awful. I mean, you can destroy somebody's life that way.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. Scamming drives me crazy because the people that are good at it are talented people that are putting in all this effort to scamming other people. And it's like, just go get a career and make your own money. What are you doing? You're a capable person. It drives me nuts.
Yep.
Scum of the earth, bro.
Indeed. Can I take a second, Paul, to discuss the effect that the pandemic had on crime in Japan?
Please do.
So as we've said, crime in Japan has risen over the past 4 years. Overall crime actually dropped during the COVID pandemic for reasons that might seem obvious. I mean, people were staying home more.
Yeah, no one was interacting. You can't have crime.
Yeah. So you could see this recent increase in crime as just returning to pre-pandemic levels. I actually saw the latest stat I could find is that right now, crime is at about 98.5% of what it was before the pandemic.
Okay.
So really, it's not that crime has been rising. It's just that the pandemic has ended and life is going back to normal.
Yeah. So maybe it'll level out in the next few years. Hopefully. There's a couple other factors I saw that could be contributing to the recent rise in crime. One is the rise of
foreigners.
Non-regular part-time jobs.
Non-regular.
We'll get to the foreigners.
Non-regular part-time
jobs. Yeah. It's just like less economic stability, less being tied to the job. Also youth disengagement. We've talked in the past about the hikikomori phenomenon. Mm-hmm. People they're just not tied into society at all anymore. What do they care about anything, right?
Not that hikikomori are disproportionately committing crimes or anything.
Yeah, I think that's just like one obvious symptom of like youth disenfranchisement or disengagement from the system.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about foreigners because
what's up with those foreigners?
Definitely a perception in Japan, obviously not held by everybody, that foreigners are a driving factor in the rise of crime rates.
Well, and I think a growing proportion of the Japanese government likes to blame the increase in the number of foreign residents. So there are statistics that arrests of foreign nationals increased by 31.4% in 2025. That's the statistic. But like I said, numbers can be manipulated.
Yes.
They don't even really need to be manipulated. They just need to be misinterpreted.
The number of foreign residents is rising quickly in Japan. So it's not surprising to see a rising number of arrests as well. That would correlate.
But also, actually, most of those cases were linked to temporary visitors.
Yeah.
But also, that's still not disproportionate to the rise in Japan's overall crime rate, which is still far below where it was in the early 2000s. As we said, it's been dropping since the early 2000s.
Yeah. I've got a couple numbers too. One of these surprised me, but apparently Japan's foreign national population is up to 3% now.
Mm.
That's not citizens, that's just people living in the country, a lot of them on temporary visas probably.
Sure. Yep.
And they accounted for about 5.5% of when police took action on a person. So slightly higher than the general average population, but also the foreign people living in Japan skew younger, and it's younger males that do tend to cause more crime. But here's, I think, the best piece of evidence that you can't blame this on foreigners in Japan. If you take the rated stats, like the per 100,000 foreign people, the crime rate's actually going down. So if the crime rate is raising in Japan, it's going down per foreigner. More foreigners are coming in. I think also the way math works with percentages, when they're 3% of the overall population, to get a 5% raise in the crime rate nationally, they would have to have like 150% or some crazy rise to account for that whole thing. Mm-hmm. That's just how percentages work.
Let me go back to the stat you said about like the percentage of police interactions that involved foreigners.
Yeah.
Let's not discount the possibility that the police are singling out foreigners because obviously they stand out.
Absolutely.
I read about a lot of foreigners saying that like they had been approached by police multiple times for no reason, really, just the police like asking them questions about whatever, you know. I mean, the police can just come up to you in Japan and ask to see your passport.
Yep. Yeah, if there's trouble in the neighborhood, maybe it's the foreigner, right? That definitely could be happening.
Yep. So basically, based on all the stuff that I was reading, there's no convincing evidence that crime committed by foreigners has increased disproportionately or that foreigners are responsible for Japan's recent uptick in reported crime.
I concur.
Okay, Paul, well, we've learned a lot in this episode, right? Let's put it into practice. Can other countries achieve lower crime rates by trying to emulate Japan in some of these factors?
I think it's possible. I don't think that you could do the same things in another country exactly the way they are in Japan and achieve the same results, obviously,
like
right?
We said, I mean, we talked about a bunch of cultural factors, and as we said, culture can be very slow to change.
Yeah. I think if I ran a different country, what would I try to do, right? I think that having reasonable gun control would be a good idea, and that might help. I think that the economic factors, right? Because we know we have numbers for this stuff. Less inequality, less unemployment, social safety nets. All of these things are going to end up with the result of a lower crime rate in your society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Community policing. I like that one. I think that's a good idea in urban areas. What do you think are some of the driving factors? What would President Jason do to try to lower crime rates?
Well, like I said, it seems to me that the factors with the most evidence to back them up are the economic ones. It seems like a pretty clear connection there.
And it's like, oh, no, we lifted 5 million people out of poverty and the crime rate didn't go down as much as we thought. Well, that's still a great result, right?
Yeah. But, I mean, if we're framing it as like, oh, I'm running a country and I can decide how to make this country as safe as possible.
Yeah, well, I should say Dictator Jason. What does Dictator Jason do?
I'll tell you. Okay, we wipe out all the adults, right? Start with the babies, okay?
Stop there. Stop there. Was this some dystopian movie we're writing here?
I said culture can be slow to change, so what you got to do is wipe out the culture entirely.
Okay, I see where you're going.
I can create the culture by molding the minds of the youth.
Yes, I killed 90% of the population, but for the next 5,000 years, there's going to be nothing but peace and prosperity. Overall, positive effect, right?
You get it.
I get you.
You can be the one adult that sticks around.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. If we're looking into the future of the developed world, I don't want to take this in a depressing direction, but I see income inequality increasing. I see the rise of AI. It's kind of hard to be hopeful that things are not going to continue along that trajectory. Unless there's a tipping point where everybody, all the people in power just get on board with something like universal basic income. I personally think that that's going to be inevitable at some point. Maybe not in our lifetimes. I mean, hopefully in our lifetimes, universal basic income will become a thing, but I think things will probably have to get pretty dire before that is actually implemented.
I think so too, but I do have this slight worry. Like, I think right now the ruling class needs a certain level of cooperation. And if all the people rose up and just decided, like, no, there'd be nothing they could do. But with the rise of robotics and things, we could get to the point where a small ruling owner class had enough power to actually literally subdue everybody else with their robots and technology.
Do you remember, I know it's been a while, but you remember our robots episode? Talked about how the mega rich were looking into, having their robot paramilitary forces, basically.
Yep. So I hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah. We shall see.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. I've kind of been conflicted personally, Paul. I've been pretty involved in implementing AI at my job, but it's, I don't know, it's one of those things where it's like, well, if I didn't do it, somebody else would. But I do feel a little bit dirty, even though like the technology itself, I think is fascinating, but it also makes you feel a little dirty using it to take work away from humans.
Yes. I've got very mixed feelings about AI, but at the end of the day, I have accepted, like, I do believe in progress. I don't think we should turn ourselves away from potentially useful technology just because it's not getting implemented in a way that helps everybody right away. I've heard the example before, when they first started mass producing cars, there was this huge industry supporting horses and carriages, and all those people lost their jobs and their businesses. And it was a huge pain at the time. But looking back 100 years later, are we really like, oh yeah, we shouldn't have made cars and still be riding around on horses because those people lost their jobs?
Well, now I'm really curious. Did horses kill more people than cars?
I don't know. Yeah.
I feel like this is going to kick off like a 5-hour discussion.
Yeah.
Should probably cut it.
Should probably wrap it up. My last final thought is, after seeing how low the homicide rate is in Japan, how much of a bad luck Brian would you feel like if you're on vacation in Japan and you get murdered? And you're just lying there dying, and you're like, really? In Japan, I'm the one guy that gets murdered? That's where my thoughts have drifted over the last few days of doing this research. Not that I'm afraid that would happen. I just think it'd be ironic or a bad way to go, Yeah. But at the end of the day, Japan is safe and wonderful, and you should go there and enjoy it.
For sure. Last thing I have to say is the Luddites were right.
You say Luddites?
Yeah, Luddites.
I'm going to have to brush up my historical knowledge on that one.
You go Google that.
Reference.
Go Google that.
Yeah.
You want to do that section where we talk about whatever?
Yeah.
Okay. I have something to talk about. I was thinking we could collaborate on this one because I know this is something we've both been into a little bit lately.
Okay.
Reborn as a vending machine, I now wander the dungeon.
Season 2 is coming out right now.
Oh, already? Wow. So this is an anime. I started watching the first season on the airplane. I forget if it was on the way to or from Japan on our recent trip, but
on the way back for me.
Okay. I was very pleasantly surprised at how high quality it was. And when I started reading about it online, I saw a lot of people saying, this anime has no right to be this good. Like, this is a ridiculous premise.
It's so dumb, but it's well done.
It really
doesn't take itself too seriously. It is what it is.
Yeah, and I feel like it's also kind of like an advertisement for Japan's amazing vending machines. Because it can change form, and it becomes all sorts of different types of vending machines depending on what the situation calls for.
Yeah.
That's pretty fun. So we should say, I guess, if it's not clear from the title, this is an isekai anime. Isekai is that genre where people are transported to another world. Usually they like die in the real world and then they're transported to this fantastical world. And I remember in the anime episode we talked about isekai, and I didn't realize at that point just how specific that trope is. Like, it's not just, oh, somebody ends up in a fantasy world. It's always like, okay, you get hit by a truck, and then you wake up, and you're in this fantasy world, and it's like a video game where there's kind of this point system, and you have to figure out how it works, and you know what I mean?
Yep.
It's very consistent on a lot of that stuff.
It is. I mean, I like isekai, but oh my goodness, has the genre become insanely flooded. It kind of takes something unique like this or special to like really get me interested in isekai anymore. 10 years ago, I would have devoured every isekai you sent my way, but it's just, now it's just like everything. And it's like, okay. Some of them are so similar that I'm like, what? I feel like I've watched this show before.
Mm-hmm. I personally haven't dove too deeply into the world of isekai, but I've seen enough to know, how consistent it is now and how, I don't know, it's funny. I feel like anime is kind of a medium where creators have more freedom to do that, to really like explore a very specific trope and kind of do everything you can possibly do with it before people get tired enough that you have to like move on to something completely different.
Right. Some of them feel like, all right, the setting is exactly the same, and the only difference is the main character's going to have this one unique, weird cheat power. And like the whole show is just that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It's creative though, I mean, I don't know. I guess you could argue that's not creative because it's all based on this very similar premise, but I like
it's funny though.
Yeah. I just like that. I guess once you set a premise that's slightly different than all the other ones, then it gets creative where you're trying to decide, where do we go with this? What kind of weird situations can arise from this new twist,
Yeah. I think what I liked about it was, the main character gets reborn as a vending machine, but he's so excited about it. Like, he's so happy to be a vending machine. Every time he gets a level up or gets a new item, he's just thrilled. And he was always cooking some new idea. I only watched the first 3 episodes because that's what was available on the flight. But it seems like every episode's just kind of like new situation arises. And what new product is this guy going to pull out of his memory of buying in a vending machine to like fix the problem and save the day? And it's kind of fun in that way.
Yeah. So you haven't watched past the 3rd episode?
I haven't yet.
Oh, I thought you had said that you had continued on with it. I just watched like the 6th or 7th episode yesterday, I think. Have you gotten to the part where there's one point where he needs to distract some dudes, so he spits out some adult magazines?
I haven't got there yet.
It's hilarious. Well, Paul, before we go, we should thank our Shogun level patrons: Doug Whitfield, Georgette and Caitlin Seymour, John W., Kelly Ardong, Pamela Arola, Jack, Brady K., Yasmin, and Kevin Harris. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
We also have 2 emperors at the moment: Eric, what is up, and Paula. Thank you so much, Paula, as well.
Thank you, Eric and Paula.
And if anyone else out there would like to help support the podcast, well, you could do that by joining the Patreon. We have a link in the show notes or on our website under the Support Us page. But I'd also like to really encourage you to leave a review if you've been enjoying the podcast. I love getting those reviews where somebody takes the time to sit down and write about how much they've gotten from the podcast. I just can't get enough of that.
Straight into his veins.
It makes me feel
he's not
so
lying.
good.
He's not lying.
Yeah.
I enjoy him too, for sure.
Well, Paul, it's been a while since I was able to ask you this, but what is going on in the next episode?
Our next episode is themed bars.
That should be cool.
Yeah, that'll be a fun one. There's some wild stuff out there.
Dude, it just occurred to me, you and I are going to a themed bar next week.
Oh, yeah, we are.
I was actually going to ask you, have you thought about what you're wearing to that?
No, I haven't yet. I still got to finish getting like shoes and stuff for the wedding I'm going to in a couple weeks.
To fill everyone in, we're going to a kind of a limited time pop-up bar sort of thing that's based on the stories of Edgar Allan Poe. So they have like themed drinks, It's going to be a really gloomy kind of macabre atmosphere, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what to expect.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the performance. I'm not sure exactly what it's going to be, but Poe-related performance.
I think they read
cool
some
drinks.
of his stories in a theatrical way.
Yeah, it should be fun.
It should be really fun. And I'm excited to talk about all of the themed bars you can enjoy in Japan as well. Looking forward to both of those things. Well, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. I did have like a whole section where I was going to rant about how politicians try to convince you that we need to imprison more people. That's how we're going to bring down crime. But actually, the thing that really has an effect is helping people.
Yeah. That'd be more for an America podcast.
Yeah, I was going to go on a rant about the USA. Policies that increase the wealth gap, like what's been happening in the US, will cause more crime, will harm society in so many ways, will only benefit the rich and powerful, which is why I'm calling upon my countrymen today to join me in rising up against our oppressors.
Jason Nealing, 2028.